So our crank sensor is good, our cam sensor is good, our spark is good. We're just losing injectors 2 and 5 repeatedly, and always those two. All the rest of them stay together. Now when we were working on this vehicle at the college, we did a lot of testing, and some of it we did not videotape. Well, there's one we did not videotape that I do want to tell you about because it was a pretty good test. Remember how the injectors were dropping out? The computer would ground them for a while and then it would not ground them and they would stop squirt and the oxygen sensor would say it's lean. What we were wondering is, are the injectors capable of being fired at that point? Can they still squirt? So the test to find out that was injectors 2 and 5. We just back probed injectors 2 and 5 on the ground wire. And then that came together in a Y. And then we came from there, went to the negative post on the battery. So when the engine was running and it was running smooth, we looked at the lab scope and the oxygen sensor was reporting rich. But then the misfire would develop. We looked at the lab scope and we would lose injector 2 and 5. And what we would do is take this probe and we would touch the negative post on the battery very rapidly, as if we were pulsing the injectors. And then we looked at the oxygen sensor, we saw it immediately go rich when we were tapping, and we would stop tapping and it would go lean again. So we were proving at that point that even though the computer was not grounding them, we could ground them and they would work. So what could be the problem?
In the current issue of Motor Magazine, I was reading a great article by Sam Bell. The article itself had nothing to do with this video, but what he said really summarized what we're talking about. He said, what we do is gather data, formulate hypotheses, and conduct experiments to verify or disprove our hypothesis. Evidence usually points right to the problem, but in our case, our evidence is proving that it's not spark delivery, it's not the fuel injectors themselves, and it's not the inputs to the PCM. Our evidence is clearly pointing away from these items and is instead pointing toward the PCM itself. So let's focus on that. Remember, the PCM stays in open loop. That's not logical.
The next thing we're suspecting is the computer.
Now, do you remember this? This was our PID data showing the short-term fuel trim, the oxygen sensor, and the loop status in open loop. Now, the run mode has two conditions, one open loop and the other closed. When the engine is first started and the engine speed is above a predetermined RPM, the system begins open loop operation, and in this mode, the PCM ignores the signal from the oxygen sensor and calculates the air-fuel ratio based on the inputs from the engine coolant temperature, the mass airflow, the MAP, the TP sensor, etc. The system will stay in open loop. Now, our engine coolant temperature is 189 degrees, so it's plenty warm, and our oxygen sensor is switching. It's either going max rich or max lean, so it is actually moving and recording. When the misfire is not there and we're in open loop, we're actually running off the PROM memory for a cold start, which is naturally a rich running condition. So the oxygen sensor is rich, and then the engine misfires, we lose the injectors and we go lean, and the oxygen sensor is seeing that.
Now this is a critical point, so I want to be sure that I'm explaining it well. Now the engine coolant temperature works on its own. It does not need the PCM to work. It reports to the PCM. The oxygen sensor is the same way. It works on its own. It does not need the PCM to work. It reports to the PCM. Now the short-term fuel trim is not a device that works at all. It simply is a report to us as we read the data, and it tells us what the computer is doing, and it is trying to manage and balance fuel. Now that's all logical. Now what's illogical here is the PCM should be in closed loop, but it's not. It's staying in open loop. Now how do we know that the oxygen sensor readings that we're seeing are logical? Well, it's because of the open loop strategy. It was designed to make a cold engine run a little bit richer when it was cold. You remember the old carburetor engines? When you would start them, you'd have to pull the choke to make them run. What this was doing was choking the engine for air or closing the throttle plate, which was making the engine then run richer. And then as the engine would warm up, you'd have to push that choke back in, which would open the throttle plate, allow more air in to give you a better blend and mix for the air-fuel mixture. That's logical. Now, what's happening with our oxygen sensor? The engine starts, it's warmed, the engine coolant temperature says the engine's warm, the oxygen sensor is warmed up from the exhaust gas, and it's switching. How do we know it's switching correctly? When the engine is running smooth, our oxygen sensor is reporting rich because we're in open loop, cold running rich strategy. Now when we develop the misfire, we lose 2 injectors. That means we're going to be lean, and the oxygen sensor immediately drops to a max lean condition. And then when the misfire goes away and they start squirting fuel again, we go back to a rich report from the oxygen sensor. Now that's logical. The short-term fuel trim is reporting 0. That's logical because the computer is not managing fuel. What's not logical is that the PCM should be in closed loop, and it's not. Now the PCM is designed to be a logical device, and all of our evidence is saying that it's not logical. So we have to fix that first. Now my hypothesis here is that whatever has caused the PCM not to go into closed loop, keeping it in open loop, probably has caused the injector driver to not ground injectors 2 and 5 at the same time. Now the proof of this hypothesis will be after we have replaced and reflashed the PCM.
Since the PCM was so accessible, it was pretty easy to verify all the powers and grounds to the PCM. And they were all good.
Now they did do some welding on this car. It's possible whenever you weld on a car, depending on where that ground is placed, if it's not placed in the right place, you could have a little voltage spike go back and take out part of the computer. So the next thing we're going to do is reflash the computer. Now this is a 2011, and all the modern cars, the computers come out with really no programming inside them. They have to be what we call flash. Now that flashing is a process and a whole procedure in itself. I use Mark Parton, who runs a company, Mobile Reflash. He's local and he comes out and does that. I'm going to let Mark explain what that is.
What we're going to do today is we're going to put a program in an ECM. Today's cars have separate ECM and TCMs. This is a typical ECM on a late model GM car. We're going to put a program in that with a device called a J-box, what I call it. It's a J2534 box. GM calls it an MDI box. We do that with the hardware, with a PC, and this can be, you can use a desktop or a portable computer, and with GM subscription online. And so we put everything together and we get on the internet, we hook everything up, make everything communicate with one another, and we install a new program so that this new computer can actually start on the car. And it's also done with various steps of writing the VIN to the new computer, reprogramming the security. On this car it's a pass-lock 3 system, so we program the security into the car, and then as well as write the VIN into it, and it's ready to go.
A crank variation learn procedure must be completed as well.
Well, Mark's got our computer all reflashed now. It takes about 30 minutes or so. We've started the car. Now let's look at the scanner. Now on the scanner you can see that first off we're now in closed loop, so the computer has taken over fuel control. Our oxygen sensor is actually switching now. If you watch the numbers, we're switching down as low as 40 and going up to 940, but it is switching back and forth. The computer sees that and allows it to go into closed loop. And if you look at fuel trim, now we're running fuel trim. And fuel trim tells you that the computer is actually managing the fuel. We're dropping down to a -10 and up to about a 9 positive. So the short-term fuel trim is responding as well. So if you have a car that you're working on and it's kind of difficult to diagnose, and it seems like it's doing some things that are illogical, we'll take a logical approach to try and understand it. It's a process of elimination. Think what could cause it, start testing, gather your evidence, and it'll lead you to the problem. One of the benefits about a video like this in a learning experience is to read the comments. Sometimes you can hear what I'm saying, but you can read the comments of some other people that have lots of experience in these areas, and it can be an enlightenment as well. So add your comments and read those of others, and we can make this a very good learning experience.